Okay, I think we're now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to what is now actually the last episode of season 3 of the future of foraging. And today we have two excellent speakers who are going to be talking about the topic of artificial intelligence and foraging, or deep learning and foraging. And so, yes, we're very excited today to have two individuals who have worked on some aspects of reinforcement learning and foraging. And we are going to have, just in case anybody is joining for the first time today, we will start with Nathan Wispinski. He's going to give his talk. We'll have a short Q&A after his talk, 5 minutes or so just for questions directed to his talk. And then Paulo Bruno Serafim will give his talk and have another short Q&A before we have a nice roundtable discussion at the end. And that will be with myself and with my 3 co-hosts that you can see here on the screen. So to begin with, I'm going to actually kick everyone out aside from our first speaker, Nathan, and then I will introduce him. And then Dennis will introduce Paulo properly later on, just before Paulo's talk. Okay, so, and Nathan, actually, if you could start sharing your slides, that would be great. And I'm just going to kick out everybody else. That's great, thank you. And so I'm just going to introduce Nathan a bit more formally now. So Nathan is a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta. He's supervised by Craig Chapman and Anthony Single. And he's worked on a range of different topics, actually, really linking processes such as perceptual decision-making, attention, and action to deep reinforcement learning. But particularly relevant to this seminar series, he's also worked on adaptive patch foraging in deep reinforcement learning, work that he did as a research scientist intern at Google DeepMind. And I believe that's what he's going to be talking about today. We're very excited to hear him talk about this. And I should have mentioned earlier that if anybody does have any questions during the talk, please use the Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screens, and we'll try and get through all the questions if possible. Okay, I think that's everything. And thanks very much, Nathan.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat if anybody has any questions, pressing questions during the talk. So yeah, again, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the Future of Foraging series. These talks have really, truly shaped how I personally think about foraging. And so I'd really like to thank the organizers for putting together this really amazing resource. I really appreciate it. Throughout the talk, I'm going to try to call out some specific episodes as influences when they come up in the top right, but I'll probably miss some. And I'll be mostly talking about one paper I did today, which I worked on as part of an internship I did at Google DeepMind, and then as a collaborator at the University of Alberta. But any views expressed in this talk are my own. So first, I want to try and convince any AI people in the crowd that biological foraging is not only really interesting, but has a lot of parallels to things that AI people already think about deeply. And I want to make some points under the idea that biological intelligence provides a great blueprint for the development of artificial intelligence. So firstly, foraging is ubiquitous. Because foraging is the act of gathering resources in the wild, almost all animals need to forage to survive. And so in short, it's a really fundamental problem for biological intelligence. And second, foraging behavior in organisms is ancient. So the control of foraging behavior is thought to have arisen over 750 million years ago. And because the evolution of the brain is very conservative, early behaviors and neural circuits tend to leave a big imprint on the evolution of the brain and likely biological intelligence. And so if we're looking at biological intelligence as a blueprint for artificial intelligence or aspects of artificial intelligence, foraging is a really great place to look in biological agents. And so next I want to argue that biological foraging environments provide tasks with really great properties for AI research. So foraging research in behavioral ecology has strong foundations in optimality models, and these provide a great formal background for foraging tests and artificial agents. And then finally, a significant part of foraging is a trade-off between exploring for more or better resources or exploiting the current resources that you have. And this explore-exploit dilemma is really important for artificial intelligence models, especially reinforcement learning models. And now for all the biology people in the crowd, I want to try and convince you that AI research is worth thinking about as researches in the biological sciences. So first, biological experiments are really, really hard. And so computational experiments allow for really nice control over agent behavior in the environment, control that you can't often get in the wild. And second, deep learning and AI provide amazing tools for optimization. And this is useful for giving insight into the pressures under which biological behavior emerged. So for example, if certain conditions like environment statistics or network architecture encourage biological-like solutions, then I'd argue this gives us clues about the pressures that may have driven the biological solutions. And Nancy Kanwisher and colleagues have a great recent review paper on this idea, although it's focused on supervised learning and biological vision. But overall, I'm not trying to convince you that AI is the future of foraging, but that AI provides some amazing tools to help us to continue to understand biological systems. So the specific project I'm going to be talking about today addresses patch foraging behavior. And so in the future of foraging, you've probably already seen this discussed a couple of times. But the patch foraging problem defines an environment where resources are distributed in clusters or patches in space. And in order to gain any resources, an agent needs to travel to and then forage within a patch, which has some finite amount of resources. And when an agent is within a patch, it can forage for resources, and these resources are often modeled as decreasing over time. And typically, this decrease is modeled as an exponential depletion of resources. So you can imagine a scenario where an agent picks the best apples on a tree first before moving towards increasingly worse apples. Or you can imagine that an agent picks the closest apples first, and subsequent apples take more time or effort to acquire. So either way, when faced with depleting resources, an agent needs to make a decision about when to keep foraging at the current patch and when to move on in search of a better patch. So patch foraging under certain conditions actually is a proven optimal solution called the marginal value theorem. And so this is a graphical model of the MVT. And so every patch encounter, an agent needs to take some time to travel to a patch and then has a decision about how long to forage within a patch. And so you can imagine that an agent takes some travel time and forages with a relatively low amount of patch time within a patch before leaving. And so has a certain amount of resources gained by the time it leaves a patch. You can imagine that the agent takes a longer time to forage within a patch, or the optimal time to forage within a patch according to this model. And this is a really elegant solution that prescribes that the agent should leave a patch when the instantaneous reward rate of the patch meets the average reward rate of the environment. So it's really elegant solution to this problem. I kind of like the graphical model a little bit like this, where we have the reward curve, the diminishing reward curve of a patch. Maybe we can discretize this into discrete rewards within time steps. And where this intersects the average reward rate in the environment is the prescription of when the agent should leave. And so we can also imagine if it's a higher rate average reward rate in the environment. So for instance, if patches are closer together or if they're more plentiful, the model prescribes that you should leave patches earlier. Or if there's a lower average reward rate in the environment. So for example, if patches are further apart, then you should take more time foraging within a patch before leaving. And so there's lots of great examples of biological experiments here. I was not a participant in any of these experiments. There's a lot of results showing that animals are optimal in certain cases, although there's many exceptions to this. So specifically for this project, we have three research questions that we wanted to answer. So first of all, we wanted to ask if deep reinforcement learning agents can forage in patchy environments. This was a question that we were interested in. We thought it might be difficult for deep reinforcement learning agents for a couple of reasons. One of which is that it requires the comparison of a really long-term view of the environment, so this average reward rate of the environment, with a really short-term, the instantaneous reward rate of a given patch. And so we wanted to see if agents could even do this, given our setup. Second, if agents could forage in patchy environments, do they approach this optimal behavior as prescribed by the NVT? And third, if agents do patch forage, can we dig into their internal dynamics, because these are computational models, to try to see how these agents solve the patch foraging problem? And maybe this can provide us some clues to biological foraging. So the experiments we ran were inspired by these really seminal animal experiments on patch foraging. And this is a video of one of those experiments. A huge thank you to Alex Koselnik for sending me this wonderful video of one of his experiments. Alex discussed this experiment in season 1, episode 1. And so in this experiment, Alex is in this tent and dropping worms periodically down the tube towards this starling on this artificial patch. And the worms are coming at increasing time intervals. And Alex is measuring the time that the starling stays on the patch before the starling moves back to the nest. And then Alex will take the tent, the artificial patch, move it further away from the nest, and remeasure starling patch residence time. So in this experiment, starlings tended to stay longer at the patch the further it was away from the nest. So it adapted its patch residence time to the travel time of the patch, just like other seminal experiments on biological foraging. So this is also an example of central place foraging, where an animal needs to return to a central location between foraging bouts. I really enjoyed this season 3, episode 1 from Barbara Webb on this topic, although we won't be discussing central place foraging today. So inspired by these biological experiments on patch foraging, we came up with this 2-patch foraging test, this kind of reduced task to test some of the basic questions about our in our project. So here we have a deep reinforcement learning agent, which is in the middle of this world on every trial. It has the world here is this flat 2D plane, and within the world are 2 patches, the 2 spheres that spawn in the world with the agent some distance apart. And the agent receives diminishing reward when it's within one of these spheres of a patch, and receives 0 reward when it's outside of one of these spheres. And importantly, there's a surface color of these spheres, and the color of the patch spheres change from white to black along with the reward curve. So the reward state of the patch is visible. There's a little bit more detail about the reward refresh. So we can imagine this is maybe you can see my cursor there. We can imagine there's a top-down view of the agent here in blue. And if the agent moves into the blue patch for illustrative purposes, we can imagine it stays there for a certain amount of time, gathers a certain amount of reward, depletes the reward state of the patch to a certain level, and then it can leave the patch. And when it enters an alternative patch, this first patch, this blue patch, refreshes to its initial reward state. And so in this way, the agent can leave this red patch back towards the blue patch, refresh blue patch, at any time step after the first time step. So agents were trained with experiences in this task for about approximately 34,000 episodes or trials. And this is an overhead view of the agent with 2 spheres. And we train the agent on a variety of patch distances for every trial, between 5 meters and 12 meters. So what were these agents? How did they, what information did they get and how do they act? So agents had this LiDAR-based observation system, which is the primary way it got information. And so agents had these invisible LiDAR rays coming out from them, and they encoded a certain amount of information. And so they encoded what each LiDAR ray was intersecting with, say, for instance, the ground or the sphere. They encoded the distance that intersection occurred, and also encoded the color of the thing it was intersecting. So again, this is really important for getting out the patch color, the patch reward state. So this information is concatenated with other information, for instance, the previous reward, put through a neural network, which includes a recurrent layer, which passes information backwards from the network in time, forwards from the network, the previous network in time, and then through actor and critic network heads, or here policy and value, which is common in deep reinforcement learning. And so how did the agents act when information was passed through this network and finally got to the actor head? And so the network outputs a mean and a variance to parameterize a Gaussian distribution for each action dimension. So for example, one of the agent's action dimensions is to turn left or turn right with some degree of intensity. And so we can imagine we input some information through the network, it passes all the way through the actor head, and it outputs a mean and a variance for this turning left, turning right. And so on every time step, it parameterizes this Gaussian, and then the final action for the agent for this action dimension is pulled randomly from that Gaussian. We can imagine on a different time step, different information comes in, and the network outputs a different mean and a different variance. And so again, the agent's turning here, for example, is drawn from this Gaussian parameterized by the network. So in this way, the agent has control over its actions, but it also there's also some stochasticity, so the agent's able to explore the environment. So I promise this is going to be my last math slide, but in general, reinforcement learning networks try to maximize this thing called the return, G of t. And this is the sum of discounted rewards. And so we have a reward at time t plus 1, a reward at time t plus 2, et cetera. But it's multiplied by this gamma parameter, this discount rate. And so there's an exponential discounting factor on these rewards. And this is done for a variety of reasons, but you can have harsher or less harsh discounting of rewards further away in time. And we train these models using a reinforcement learning algorithm called maximum a posteriori policy optimization. And so this is an actor-critic method, so it has an actor head and a critic head of the network. It's model-free. It doesn't have a pre-baked model of the world. It's off policy, so it stores experiences in a memory buffer. And it's a continuous action space algorithm. So it parameterizes action spaces and is able to take continuous actions rather than discrete actions. And so if you want some more details on MPO, the original paper's over here, but there's also some open source code from DeepMind now available online. But in general, MPO alternates between improving the network's estimates of rewards based on their buffered experience and changing the probability of actions according to the network's estimate of how rewarding those actions are. And so large aspects of the agent environment we used here were adapted from the fantastic cultural general intelligence team at DeepMind. I'd highly recommend checking out their recent paper on cultural transmission between deep reinforcement learning agents if you get the chance. It's a really beautiful paper. And so we train these agents for a certain amount of time, and then once training is done, we freeze their parameters and we can visualize their behavior. And so here is an agent at the very end of training where we've frozen their parameters, the agent stops learning, and we put it in a trial with a certain patch distance. We can see that the agent moves back and forth between these patches, and the patches are changing their color over time. The reward stays depleting. And we can see this number at the top of the agent, its reward is increasing over time while it's foraging within a patch. It may be hard to see on some screens. But we found this video really exciting. It looks like the agent is going back and forth between patches, staying in patches for a certain time, not until they're fully depleted. So we found this really exciting that the agents do seem to be patch foraging. And so now what we can do with all the agents that we trained, we can freeze their parameters so they stop learning, and then we can put them in new trials. And we put them specifically in evaluation trials with 6 meter, 8 meter, 10 meter, and 12 meter patch distances. So we can run them through several trials now that their parameters are frozen and analyze their behavior now that there's no learning taking place. And so we can look at a single agent's performance across a single example episode or trial. And we can see that the agent's score or reward increases over time as it transits between patches 1 and patches 2 here in blue and red. And also we can look at a single agent's average performance across different evaluation environments. And so agents score significantly higher on 6 meter versus 12 meter environments, which makes intuitive sense. The patches are closer together, they're easier to access for the agent. But importantly, these trained agents do much, much better than agents that randomly take actions in the environment. So they've learned a good action policy for this environment to get more reward than random actions would get. So agents can forage. They do go back and forth between patches, but do they forage adaptively? So for instance, you can imagine a non-adaptive agent. This is example data, where an agent learns a policy to stay in a patch for a certain amount of time and then leave, regardless of the environment it's in. And this might be a reasonable policy to learn. It might be the mean of all the environments that it's seen during training or something like that. We can also imagine an adaptive agent that while it experiences information through a trial, through an episode, it changes its patch leaving time according to patch distance. So it stays longer when patches are further apart, when there's a more scarce environment. And when we look at the actual data, this is an average of 12 trained agents. Agents significantly stay longer in environments where patches were further apart, even though their parameters were frozen. And so they're taking experience from the single trial that they're in, and they're adapting their patch leaving times to their experience on the individual trial, which we find really exciting. So our next question is, the agents are adaptive, but are they adaptive optimally, according to the MVT? And the answer here is kind of a soft no. Agents significantly overstayed relative to the MVT optimal solution that we calculated for each agent environment pair. Now, this is a little bit interesting because this overstaying is related to the amount of temporal discounting that the agents had. So remember, the agents try to maximize this return, which includes this discount rate parameter gamma. And we train agents with different gammas, different harshnesses of discounting future rewards. And what we see is that agents that more harshly discounted rewards in the future tended to overstay more often. And this is probably better seen if we collapse across patch distance into a mean. The agents more harshly discounted in blue overstayed more relative to the MVT relative to agents that discounted less harshly in time. And so there was a significant relationship there. And so we wanted to try to take a step back and try to account for this behavior. And so we tried to account for this temporal discounting, exponential temporal discounting in the MVT. And so if you want to know a little bit more about temporal discounting and patch foraging, I really highly recommend some work from Nathaniel Daw and Sarah Constantino. Nathaniel spoke in season 2, episode 1 at the Future of Foraging. And so what we can do is we can do a simulation here where we take our statistics of the environment, and over the travel steps that it takes agents to go back and forth between patches, we can plot the optimal patch residence time prescribed by the MVT. But we can also do a numerical simulation that if the agents discounted rewards exponentially in the future, how long should the agent be staying in a particular patch given the discount rate? And so this is just for the 4 example discounts that we had in this experiment. And so agents should stay longer if they're more harshly discounting rewards in the future. There's a hyperparameter we said at the beginning of the experiment. And so we take this agent behavior and we can apply this transformation And we now see that we remove a lot of this variance, and agents are now not significantly different from this discounted MPT solution. And so the agents do approach optimal, but we have to take into consideration the amount of temporal discounting that they're hardwired to have. So this is something to maybe discuss later. So finally, we want to try to find some clues about how these networks are able to adaptively patch forage. We have access to all the internal dynamics in the network, but it turns out that's a lot of data to deal with. And so we turned to a framework to help interpret these model dynamics. And specifically, we used a foraging evidence accumulation framework. And Albert Haiti talked about this in his excellent season 1, episode 3 talk. I really highly recommend that you check it out. But in short, agents have this patch decision variable that accumulates to a decision threshold, which dictates when an agent leaves a patch. And we thought this framework might help explain patch leaving time variability within a single evaluation environment. So for instance, on patch encounters where an agent left the earliest, we would expect a correlate to a decision variable with a really high slope here in black. And conversely, on patch encounters where agents left the latest, we would expect a proxy of a decision variable with a shallower slope, which reaches threshold later. So here in pink. And so we found this pattern in many individual units within the recurrent layer of the network, that on patch encounters where agents left relatively early, unit activations rose with a steeper slope compared to when agents left patches later. We can also decompose the entire recurrent layer of the network using principal components analysis, and the results held for a major principal component in addition to individual units. And these results coarsely mirror those from the stellar study led by Ben Hayden, where primate dorsal anterior cingulate neurons were recorded during a foraging test. And Ben gave an excellent talk in season 1, episode 6. So we looked at network dynamics that related to patch leaving time variability within patch environments. But what about between these environments? So we showed that agents adapted their patch leaving time to the environment, but what mechanism is behind this adaptive behavior? Can we get some clues about how the agents adapt? So within this framework, there are 2 proposed ways to adapt patch leaving times. And so this is analysis that was inspired by one of Ben Hayden's papers. So first, different environment variables might change the mean slope of a decision variable. So for example, in more plentiful environments, the mean slope might increase, causing faster patch leaving times. And conversely, in more scarce environments, the mean slope might decrease, causing slower patch leaving times. When we look at individual units or large principal components, we don't really see much of a relationship between a proxy for mean slope and the patch distance environment. So it doesn't really look like this mechanism holds up, at least in the recurrent layer of the network. However, a second mechanism to adapt patch leaving times might be to raise or lower a decision threshold. So for example, in more plentiful environments, this decision threshold might decrease, causing faster patch leaving times because the decision variable doesn't need to accumulate as long. And conversely, in more scarce environments, the decision threshold might increase, causing slower patch leaving times. And looking at both individual units and a large principal component, we do see this relationship, that a proxy for decision threshold systematically changes with patch distance, which is itself related to how long agents stay in a patch on average. And overall, these data are preliminary, but they nicely parallel this theoretical work in primate neural recordings about how biological agents might solve the patch foraging problem. And so to conclude, we had 3 research questions. We asked if deep reinforcement learning agents can patch forage in patchy environments, and they can do so, and they can do so adaptively, even though their parameters are frozen. We asked if deep reinforcement learning agents approach the optimal behavior, and we see that they do, but only when accounting for temporal discounting. And we wanted to ask how deep RL agents solve the patch foraging problem. And again, this is very preliminary, but at least some of the dynamics are consistent with an accumulation model, both really nice theoretical work and experimental work. And so where do we go from here? And so some of our preliminary simulations after this were here on the left with multiple patches in 2D space. And these patches are distributed according to a random uniform distribution in 2D space. And so these experiments were partially inspired by season 1, episode 2 with Lars Chitka and Susan Healy. Here's a video from, I believe, Lars Chitka's lab where there's a bee with a hive at the bottom and 5 artificial patches placed in a large field. And so part of some of this behavior that we can now look at is behavior in environments that don't necessarily have an optimal solution, but maybe we can take a look at the origins of this biological behavior by optimizing these reinforcement learning agents to maximize reward. And so we can imagine if the environment had certain patch distribution statistics, might biological behavior emerge or not emerge? And might this give us some clues into the environment statistics of the world that drove animal behavior? we were also thinking about maybe running some simulations that are multi-agent, where there's multiple different agents and there's cooperative or competitive foraging. And again, a situation where the optimal solution is not known or very hard to compute, but we're able to run these simulations and observe this behavior and maybe make some analogs to biological behavior to better understand it. So if you want to know more, our paper's out now on transactions of machine learning research. So there's more details in there. And I had the absolutely amazing opportunity to work with these wonderful people at DeepMind, at the University of Alberta and beyond, to try to answer some of these questions about patch foraging. Thank you so much for listening.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathan. That was excellent. So we haven't had any questions in the box. I do have one or two quick questions myself, if that's okay, and then and we'll see if anybody else pops up with any other. I mean, I think the good thing is it means that you were very clear in your talk, because usually it's they're clarifying questions. Oh, here we go. Rory has a question.
Sure.
Oh, sure. Okay, so let's answer Rory's question first, and then I'll ask my own one. So Rory says, really cool stuff. In the initial experiment testing the reinforcement learning agent foraging, what was the reason that you locked the parameters to stop learning?
So typically in deep learning experiments, there's a training phase and then a testing phase. And this is, some people are looking at this critically, but typically there's a phase where you specify a learning algorithm and you train a deep neural network with a learning algorithm, and then you freeze the weights and you evaluate performance given what the network has learned between these parameters. And so this is so that you can observe the behavior without this effect of this learning algorithm that you've explicitly programmed into the network. That's kind of the general reason that most people do it, and at least that we did in this experiment.
That's great. Thank you. I think I kind of have a sort of similar question in terms of choice. I mean, I think a lot of my questions are about choices that you've made in terms of your approach to the modeling, which kind of makes sense, right? Because you have to make a lot of choices. So one more general question. So you have is it the LiDAR with being able to sort of sense, let's say, like there's a sort of visual information that the agent has. And I was kind of curious if you'd ever thought about adding a sort of increasing the complexity of the environment, not just in terms of the number of patches, let's say, but whether this could mean that your agents could explore more complex environments that have barriers or other obstacles, other ways in which also the travel time could sort of be manipulated by the agent having to take a longer path, for example, and whether you've kind of already set yourself up nicely here by developing agents that can sort of have these like sensing properties.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, the LiDAR arrays were mostly used because they worked so well in past deep reinforcement learning agents. And so this was kind of an easy step to, how do we get agents to sense the world? This way has worked really well in the past. Let's use this as a first step. One of the things about other environments is you're exactly right. This is a relatively complex way to look at patch foraging between two patches. But this was done so that it's a first step to making these really complex environments. So for instance, like this beautiful paper from the CGI team at DeepMind have these really complex environments where there's multiple agents in space, there's multiple patches, there's obstacles, there's rough terrain. And so things like this, environments like this could maybe be used to test agents that if they have different environment statistics, what solutions do they find? What abilities do they have because of the pressures in the environment that they need to seek reward within these environmental situations. As that was, in my mind, that's the kind of goal. And this study is really just like a very, very preliminary first test of can agents patch forage in this really reduced environment. And now look at all the exciting things that we could possibly do by adding some more spheres, adding another agent in the world or something like that, and then comparing that to biological behavior to maybe try to get a little bit of these clues. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I'm just really excited about all the future directions that might come from this.
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do with this, right? And we have a couple more questions actually now. So Fleet Rodriguez says, thanks for the nice talk. Maybe you said this and he missed it, but what is the reset delay on the patches? Is there some inter-patch distance for which it becomes optimal to just wait it out at one particular patch?
So in the two-patch foraging task, if I could find that slide really quickly. So the patch refreshes. So again, in this particular situation, an agent has depleted a patch a certain amount of time. And then when it moves into the alternative patch, the time point that it moves onto the alternative patch the other patch is refreshed to its initial patch starting state. And so in that way, we kind of program this to have patch independence, that when an agent enters a patch, the other patch is perfectly refreshed. It's kind of like finding a new patch, although you really already know where it is. Maybe you're also talking about the later slides, the last preliminary simulation that we did for the paper, where there's multiple patches in space. And this was just a basic rule that after you visited 4 unique patches, the fourth patch in the past refreshes to its initial state. Although there's a bunch of different work that people do with, the refresh statistics of the environment and how that might change how agents do trap lining, how agents navigate the world. If patches refresh slowly or if they refresh instantaneously, like we did in this simulation, that's an open question. And I think it would be really interesting to check out.
Yeah, this also relates a little bit to something that I think I'll bring up more in the discussion afterwards, but sort of model-based versus model-free approaches, and whether you might want to actually be developing some model of the environment, maybe becomes useful anyway, but I'm not going to talk about that. And finally, Emma asks, well, she says, thanks for the really great talk. I'm curious if you would also expect on-policy algorithms to be successful. And I feel like, again, that's sort of in the same vein as what I was just mentioning. So.
Yeah, it's a good question. I am interested to see what other RL algorithms might do, and might they find different solutions. Personally, I might be interested in trying VMPO, which, if I remember correctly, is an on-policy kind of adaptation of MPO, to see if it converges to a similar algorithm. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think this gets a kind of a deeper question about on-policy, off-policy, and maybe experiences for memory versus experiences online. Yeah, there's a lot to say there, and I don't know if I have coherent thoughts about that at the moment.
No worries. Yeah, maybe again we can talk about it a little bit more later.
Yeah,
we actually also have one final question. I'll squeeze it in very quickly if that's okay. From Margarita Sousa, who says, "Thank you for the talk. Have you tried to constrain the number of neurons and the maximum firing rate of the units, and understood what changes in the behavior?"
We haven't tried to constrain the maximum number of neurons in there. But again, this kind of gets back to, it's an interesting question, but it gets back to one of the main points that I think AI or deep reinforcement learning can be used as a tool for understanding biological simulations. I've talked a lot about constraining the environment statistics, like the way in which patches refresh and how that might have pressures for a particular behavioral solution for agents. But you can also imagine if the agent has internal pressures, like it only has a few amount of neurons to compute this, how might that change, provide a constraint on this optimization and change the behavior that the agents might do. So we haven't done that, but it's an interesting question. You can also change not necessarily the number of neurons, but the architecture in different ways for how the information might be processed. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much, Nathan. So if you could stop sharing your screen, I'm going to invite Dennis and Paulo back on screen. Yes, here we go. And I'm going to kick you out now, but thank you for your talk, and you'll be back on later for the roundtable discussion. Okay, perfect. And Dennis, yeah, you can.
Yeah. Great. So it's my pleasure to introduce the second speaker today, Paulo Bruno Serafim. He's a PhD student at the GSSI in L'Aquila in Italy. Before he completed his master's and bachelor's in Fortaleza in Brazil. And like Nathan, he's also interested in deep reinforcement learning, and specifically in multi-agent cooperation and competition. So how many agents in an environment compete and cooperate for resources, foraging for resources. And take it away, Paulo, for your talk. Thanks.
Oh, Paulo, I think you're muted. Let me just. I think, sorry, I think I'm muted. It's okay. Yes, perfect. Thanks. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Laura. Thank you, Dennis, for the introduction. And I would like to thank also Nathan for the fantastic talk he just gave us. So I would like to go in a different direction a little bit and talk about more computational aspects of foraging with deep reinforcement learning And it's very good that Nathan talked about his fantastic work. It was awesome to see what we can do and what we are doing today in this research. So I'll try to give you a little, very brief overview of deep reinforcement learning and also the applications in foraging here. First, what is reinforcement learning? And to answer this question, if you go to the Google or Wikipedia, you'll see a lot of things. That is a macro decision process, and we have the Q-learning equations, you have the value equations, but okay, I'm not going to explain this to you. Okay, so this is just kidding. I'm going to talk more briefly, generally, and first we start with machine learning. So to talk about reinforcement learning, we have to talk about machine learning, which is a part of the general aspects of artificial intelligence. In machine learning, we have mainly three different learning paradigms. The first one is the supervised learning. So is the most common one, is the one that we have the answer, therefore it's supervised. So we give an input to a model, the model gives us an answer, and then we compare our answer with the model and say, okay, it's correct, it's good, or it's not. So if you pass an image of a dog and the model says it's a cat, okay, this is not good, this is wrong, so we have to learn differently, so we have to train the weights, and that's what Nathan mentioned in the training phase. So we are training until the model converts to give us, most of the time at least, the correct answer. A second paradigm is unsupervised learning. In this case, since it's unsupervised, we don't have any kind of supervision, we don't have the answers, we don't know what is the correct answer. But what can we do with this? We can find patterns in the data. For example, this image, you can see a clusterization algorithm. So we can see that there are patches of data in different locations. This is possible to do without knowing the correct answer. And the third paradigm is reinforcement learning itself. In this case, I'm showing here the diagram of the general reinforcement learning dynamics. We have an agent. This agent is inside an environment, and the agent is currently on a given state and performs an action to the environment, and he receives a reward as a consequence of his actions. And for the ones here that are familiar with psychology, yes, very similar to behaviorism and the concepts of operating conditioning. And historically, this is one of the trends of reinforcement learning. So when we talk about modern reinforcement learning, we are talking about trends that came from the behaviorism, psychology. We are talking about things that came from the engineer side of control optimization. We are talking also about the computational aspects of artificial intelligence. So all of this is inside, say, the general framework of reinforcement learning. And in this case, the operating conditioning has a very classic example, the Skinner box. You have a mouse, and if the mouse sees a green light and pushes a lever, then it gets food. If it pushes the mouse pushes a lever when the light is red, it gets a shock. So we are giving positive rewards and positive punishments so that the mouse can learn what to do in a given situation. It's basically the same thing, and it's a very, very nice way to show this is using games. Games is by far the most used test bed of reinforcement learning. So in this case, we have the Mario. So if you play it, you know that you can standing, then you press a button and Mario will jump, or it will run, you can go to the right, can go to the left. So you are the player, you are the agent in this case. The environment is the game itself. And for every action you perform, you receive a reward. So if you die, you lose points. If you get a coin, you gain points. So and then you learn, okay, I should do this, should do that. And now, when it comes to deep reinforcement learning, first it is important to say, where does the deep learning comes from? And this is not very easy because deep learning is not new. Deep learning is the consequence of a research that started back in the 40s. So although when we talk about deep learning, we are talking about the works that the research that was made basically in the last 15 to 20 years, the whole concept of artificial neural networks and the evolution of deep learning, it's not is more than 8 years old right now. So everything started with in 1943, 8 years right now, from the research of McCulloch and Pitts, when they tried to create a computational version of a neuron. So we had the neuron, and they created this version, the simplified version. Okay, this is a bit more complex than the ones that they presented at the time. So this is a decade after, more or less. And as you can see, basically we have the dendrites, the axons, everything is trying to be mapped to a computational concept and mathematical concept. So we are talking about the 40s. There was no computer like we have right now. The computers were huge, very specific, was very hard to create software in those computers. So these were initial concepts that of a single neuron. But then as the time went by, we can get this single neuron and put they together and create multiple neurons connected at the same time, forming a neural network. In this case, an artificial neural network. In this case, we have an initial layer, a middle layer, and an output layer. But okay, if I can add as many neurons supposedly as I could, what can I do? I can add another layer. So if I can create more layers and more layers, I can also change a bit the connection of these layers and create three-dimensional connections or two-dimensional connections or one-dimensional connections. It's up to us. And by creating newer and newer and newer connections, adding newer and newer and newer neurons, we start creating a bigger, a larger, a deeper neural network. So that's where the name comes from in the last 15, 20 years. And the term itself of deep learning, I like to show this, is Geoffrey Hinton said 10 years ago, 2013, that in the late 90s and the early 2000s, people were very pessimistic about neural networks, artificial neural networks. So when they tried to pursue research on this, it was very hard to publish it. The conferences were not accepting, journals were not accepting. So in this case, that he mentioned, that the conference on machine learning said that neural networks was not an appropriate topic for the conference. So today this is crazy. Basically, when you talk about machine learning, it's almost a synonym of deep learning. But it was like that at the time. This is just 10 years ago he mentioned, but it happened like 20 years ago, very, very recent. So all this trend is this happened because we have now these deep neural networks. At the beginning, we have only one neuron, then we have shallow neural networks, and now we have deep neural networks. But we could create those deep neural networks since the beginning. But why only now we can make those deep neural networks do something meaningful? Because we have also more information. So neural networks, they learn using information. And now we have internet. We have lots of information available, lots of data sets available. However, there's a problem. We have a huge neural network. We have a lot of information. But how to train this using a computer? So that's when it comes the computational power. So with the advancement of the GPUs, the graphical processor units, we could train those bigger neural networks, those deep neural networks, using a huge amount of data. And this is what made the success of deep learning in the 20 years ago, basically. And in fact, Ian LeCun, Geoffrey Hinton, and Yoshua Bengio, three of the fathers of this modern deep learning trend, they won the Turing Prize of 2018, which for us in computer science is more or less the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. It's the most prestigious prize we have in computer science. And now we have the reinforcement learning. We understand a bit of where does the deep come from. So how to join them together? From the original deep reinforcement learning, we have an agent, the environment, and this agent interacts with the environment by performing actions, getting rewards, going to different states, etc. What we can do, the agent can be a mouse, the agent can be humans, can be Mario, and can be a neural network. So in this case, deep reinforcement learning, it's the way that we say we are using deep neural networks to train the agents, to make the agents learn on how to perform using reinforcement learning. This started with this paper, Playing Apart with Deep Reinforcement Learning, by Emini et al. And it's from the 2013, 10 years ago. And at the time, this paper was developed in the startup called DeepMind Technologies. So Nathan just mentioned Google's DeepMind. This startup was acquired by Google a few months after this paper was published. But the time was just a startup, and they show how the agents could learn how to play Atari games, and this was evolved. And in 2015, now already part of Google, they published a paper on Nature called Human Level Control Through Deep Reinforcement Learning. This is the most important paper on deep reinforcement learning, for sure, in more than 20,000 citations. And I would like to show you a video that what they show. This video is from that time, but if you go to the YouTube, you'll see that it was published before. So in the beginning, the agent doesn't know what to do. So it tries more or less randomly goes straight to the right and losing and losing. Then after the training phase going on, the agent starts improving the behavior. And so after 200 training episodes, we have a better agent. 400 episodes, the agent basically don't die anymore. It starts increasing the score. And eventually, all those training will lead to these agents playing way better than the humans. So at the time, this was huge. This was very far from what we had. At the time, we were making research not with vision. So these agents is seeing the pixels on the screen. Is seeing the same thing that we are seeing here. So this was not common. What's common was to use a vector of features. You say, okay, you have many points, you are in the position X and Y, and the ball is in the position X1, Y2, and things like that. So using the screen was a huge improvement of what we had. And this became very, very famous when the DeepMind created the AlphaGo and was able to beat the world champion, the best player of Go at the time. And this also, again, Go is a board game. When IBM's Deep Blue won against Kasparov in 1997, chess was always thought as the pinnacle of the human intelligence. So, okay, no computer will ever be able to defeat a human on a game of chess. And when Deep Blue was successful, it was like, okay, what can we do now as computer scientists? What is the next step? What is the next game that we should be able to win? And then Go was the next one, because Go is, in a sense, is a board game similar to chess, but many more times more complex than chess. And it was very hard to do this. And I remember I was in my bachelor's and I was looking for research on games, and people used to say, okay, Go is very, very hard. It would be at least 2 decades, 1 decade from now, so that we'll be able to beat a good human player. At the time, the best AIs would have average or amateur performance, and then they beat the goal. So it was, again, huge. I really recommend the AlphaGo documentary that has available freely on YouTube. You can find it and the DeepMind's channel. So very good documentary. And then we start seeing every time more and more remarkable results using deep reinforcement learning. For example, for the ones who know, Dota 2 is a more complex game. You have 2 teams of 5 people playing against each other, and so each team has to collaborate and has to compete against the other. So it's more complex. And OpenAI created a deep reinforcement learning technology that was able to beat the world champions at the time. So also very remarkable. And DeepMind again in 2019 was able to defeat the best players in the world in the game StarCraft 2. It's a strategy game that you control the mouse, so you don't have full access. It's not like you're just going right to left. No, you have to control the mouse. You have to select positions. You have to make long-term choices. So also another very very good performance. I like to show this. This is Mana. It was at the time the best player of StarCraft 2, and when he played Alpha Star, he said that I'm hoping for 5-0, winning all the games, and but being realistic, it would be 4-1 in my favor, and the result was that he lost all 5 games. So this is how good we were already, and this is a very nice example of OpenAI showing emergent behavior on deep reinforcement learning agents. I have show here a video. So you have a hide and seek game where the red agents had to just look and see the blue agents, while the blue agents had to run or to escape. They don't need to be seen. And the blue agents learning on how to use the boxes to fill the gaps so that the red agents could not enter. And then the red agents learn on how to use the ramp to be able to go inside the room. So the blue agents then learn on how to get the ramp, put the ramp inside the room. So this is a very very nice examples of deep reinforcement learning in action. Okay, now we can go to foraging and deep reinforcement learning. I would like you to look at this picture. This is the vision of a game. It is based on the Doom game. It is a first-person shooter game, but this environment specifically doesn't have any kind of shoots or guns or weapons. Is a foraging environment, and in this picture we have the vision of the screen that we see. Okay, we can pass this screen to the agent, and this agent can move forward, or it can turn right, or it can turn left. So these are the 3 possible actions. And if the agent collides with a med kit, so it's a health package, basically, it will gain more health. If collides with a poison, blue, it will lose health. And over time, it will keep losing and losing health. So it's a very basic scenario of food collection. But in this case, in a first-person, 3-dimensional game, but it's the classical food collection environment. Okay, and this was a work that I did when I was in my master's. I'm sorry that the video is so short because for some external reasons I lost access to my videos at the time. So you can see that the agent learned how to find only the med kits and avoid the poisons. So I will play it again. On the left side, you can see the vision, the game screen, and on the right side, you can see how the agent sees. In this case, this agent specifically had a grayscale vision, so no colors, and also a reduced view. It's more pixelated. The squares are very big compared to the green screen. So sometimes it's hard even for us to identify what is a med kit or not, and the agent was able to learn and to achieve an optimal behavior. So, and this was a work that was presented in a Brazilian conference of games and entertainment in 2017. So it was like already 6 years ago, and it was a simple experiment with a classical food collector framework. But for us, it was the first time that we can say, okay, we can use a vision agent to solve this task. Because before we used sensors, we had the information, maybe the information about the position of the fruits or the position of the poisons, or even using very, very low quality, like 5x5 pixel information. In this case, no, we have the screen, the game screen, basically pre-processing before removing the colors, and seeing that the agent was able to achieve this optimal behavior was very nice. And 3 years later, we started working with, in the bachelor's thesis, there was a course supervisor of a student in our group. He was started working in a 3D environment that was part of the doctoral research of one of our professors. And in this case, the 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 environment was a physically based environment. So the balls are now spheres. They can move, they can collide with each other, and the agent, which is this blue dot on the upper right screen on the left, is based on real robots. So theoretically, we could use the trained agent to run in the real world. And you can see in the right is the vision of the agent. Again, it's a first-person vision, and we have a depth vision. So the fruits and the bad fruits that are closer are bigger and things like that. And the agent also learned how to behave optimally. This was way harder than the previous one because the other was already a game with, that you just collide and it's good. In this case, I'll show a video. Now we have the agent has to collide in a single point, so it's basically like its mouth. So we can, if it collides laterally, it will not get the food, and since it is physically based, we'll see in a couple of seconds that the fruits move. So you have to keep track of this. And so it was harder to do, but also again, using deep reinforcement learning, we were able to make this agent learn what to do optimally. Okay. So this was published in 2020. So it was more recently, and now, and I sorry for the quality, this is a work in progress. This is part of the master thesis of one of our students that I'm supervising, and now we are working again with the Visboom, but with a more complex environment. In this case, first you can see there are walls, so it's harder to navigate inside the environment. The medkits and the poisons, they are not more green and blue. They are basically white with different shapes. So it's harder to identify those. And the most important part is that these agents, they have audio sources, they have audio inputs. So we are doing research on multisensory agents. So not only using the vision, but also audio clues. So the medkits make one type of audio, and then the poisons make a different type of sound. So when trying to distinguish those two, the agent could be successful. So now this is ongoing research. So we have very preliminary results. Publisher was not even submitted yet. We're still ongoing, but this is the direction we are going right now. So a bit more complex than we had is to use multisensory agents. And I would like to use this last part of my talk in a sort of call to action. So, okay, you watched our talks, you find nice, you are enthusiastic about foraging, you know a bit of programming, and you like to try yourself, but you don't know where to start. So I will show you some environments that you can use. There are a lot of environments. These are, I'm only showing very few of them, but you can find many more. Of course, you have the option to do it yourself. This is also a case, and we know how research works. Often we find several framework systems that say, no, we're very general, we have everything you need, and then we try and we don't have. So sometimes we have to create ourselves. That it happens. But there are some ready-to-use environments that can also be good for you. First one is mini-grid. Mini-grid, is the name suggests, is a grid-based environment, is discrete actions, so you can move up, move left, you can collect. In this case, on the left, you have an agent that is first has to collect a key to open a door, then to reach the goal. The other has to do the same, but the environment is more complex. And there are several already ready-to-use environments, but none of them is specifically with foraging. But you can create easily. I already used it, already created some environments, not for foraging, but for other reasons. And it's easy. Okay, I'm assuming that you have some familiarity with programming, especially with Python, so basically research machine learning, most part is doing on Python. So this is an option for you. Another one is the level-based foraging, is a multi-agent reinforcement learning environment specifically for foraging. So already some scenarios ready to use. You have multiple agents that can cooperate with each other and try to find food or give food to another one. So it's also not very recent, this one, but is available, so you can try to use. Those cases are 2D environments. If you want to use a 3D environment, this is one of them, the one that I showed you. And this is another visual environment for foraging. Again, a traditional food collection environment. You lose health every time, and you have to get the magic kits. You cannot get the poisons, and in this case, it is a person that is playing, so that's why it's so well played. So you can even again you can try to train an agent and compete with the agent you train. It is also possible. And another one is the Unity machine learning agents. So if you play video games, you probably are familiar with Unity. Unity is a game engine that facilitates you to create games, basically, and several famous games are made using Unity. And they released a version of Unity that you can use for creating machine learning environments and training agents. For example, the work that Nathan presented was created using Unity. So in this case, you have plenty of available environments. You can, of course, create yourself, do your own custom environment. But you see in the bottom right, we have again the food collector. This is the view of the food collector. You have multiple agents. You have sensors. You have LiDAR sensors, for example. You have vision. So you can try to play a bit. You can create the custom agents. It's not very easy to start, but if you can do it, you have a huge availability of options. And one thing that's nice with Unity is that you can customize. Since it's a game engine, you can add different things and create things like this video here. That it is a robo ants environment that the author used real ants 3D models and very nice animations and showing the path. So you can create this kind of thing that not only can serve the purpose of achieving the goals and creating optimal agents, is also visually very nice to see. So you can clearly see these things. So if you can work with Unity, and you can generate very nice results, not only regarding optimal behavior, but also regarding the visual aspects of your work. Okay, and so with this, I hope that I had show you in these talks you could see that foraging deep learning is a really hot topic right now. Have plenty of open challenge. It's very nice, very rewarding. So when you start training your agent, it's not learning, and then you start playing a bit and changing some parameters and making some adjustments, and you say, okay, it's working right now. So it's very nice to see. You can visually see the results. So it's very nice. And if you like all those things, you have plenty of options to work with this very, very nice current research, very nice already research. And what I have to say now is thank you. I'd like to thank you, Future of Orange, for the invitations. Very great to be here. Thank you very much for receiving me. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paulo. That was great. And actually, in a lot of ways, like a really nice way to sort of end that really is the future of foraging, right? And in some senses, I think some people would think about ways in which we could take exactly what you were just saying. It's very interesting also as well to realize how many tools there are available, which is, yeah, it's good to know. One question I had was about the sort of possibilities of thinking about reinforcement learning outside of reinforcement per se, or different types of reinforcement. You were talking also about using different sensory information as well. Sorry, Paula, are you still there? I don't know. You seem frozen on my end. Oh, I don't know if he's. Are you still there? I don't. Okay. Let me. Oh, okay. Yes. Okay. So he is gone, unfortunately. What I might do then is invite everyone else back on screen. I guess because most of my questions were also sort of more broadly applicable to general, topics to do with reinforcement learning and foraging. So let me just. And hopefully Paulo will be back on screen soon. But let me. There's obviously got to be technical issues on the last the last talk. So of course, if anybody has any questions specific for Paulo, please do put them in the question box, and we can ask him if he manages to reconnect.
Maybe let's try just inviting him again.
Yeah, I am. It says accepted in connecting, so I'm not sure what else to do aside from that. I'm loving it. Yes.
So sorry. I'm so sorry.
That was perfect timing. It was great because I was like, wait, hold on a second. Is he? Can he hear what I'm saying right now? Am I just speaking into the voice? I think Rory. So if you could. I mean, Paula, I was just going to ask you about. I don't know how much of what you heard of my rambling at the end of your talk, but I was just saying thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting and really interesting to hear about the sort of the possibilities, so to speak, right? Like of what actually. The tools that are available is actually pretty incredible. But I guess in a way, so my question might be a little bit about sort of how one might try and tie conceptual ideas of foraging or other types of decision making even with the kinds of tools that are available. I mean, how much do you think, for example, like a deep understanding of reinforcement learning, as you like went through a really nice sort of summary of the field and everything and how it's developed, like how much do you think that's essential? Or do you think it's a good idea for people to start kind of messing around and trying things out in different environments and learning from that? Yeah.
Okay. One good thing that we have right now is that not only we have plenty of environments available, we also have the algorithms available, ready to use. So we have things like, I will mention here, stable baselines, we have race, RLlib, we have clean RL. All of these are implementations of reinforcement learning methods that are available to use. So you can use them like right now without not knowing much about reinforcement learning. Unfortunately, you have to know a bit about programming. So it's not like you could just use some other tools, but if you know how to program, even if you don't know how to use reinforcement learning specifically, but you will be able to play a bit. But again, the thing is, you can do the tutorials, you can play a bit, you can have some the initial fun, but when you try to do the things that you want, will be more complex. So in this case, yes, you have some problems. When the agent doesn't work, it's hard to know why. So you have to trick the agent, see if the problem of the model, of the environment. So in this case, you need a bit more deeper understanding of reinforcement learning or any other technique that you use. Okay, you are not required to use reinforcement learning. Of course, you can use several techniques, but in this case, you can start playing. If you had a bit of understanding of programming, you can start playing without knowing much about reinforcement learning.
I've got one. Sorry, I don't know if the background is still bad, the noise, but you can hear me okay, more or less. All right. Yeah, thanks a lot. It's very interesting. I was wondering, you speak quite a bit when presenting these tasks about kind of like the complexity of the environment, and I was just wondering what kind of parameters of like complexity do you find are the most like influential in influencing the difficulty of kind of finding a solution for the agents? Like I can imagine that sort of the dimensions of the environment might be important, but were there any particular parameters that kind of surprise you when constructing these kind of simulations?
Okay, so when I mention complexity of an environment, everything is involved. So the size of the environment itself, the number of objects that are in the environment. So if you have, for example, few objects and they are distant from the agent, it's hard to see. Sometimes you use more than just one sensor for example, you can use vision, you can use lidars, you can use audio sensor. So it depends, the complexity depends on the problem that you are trying to resolve. So in this case, there are several aspects that you have to consider. For example, in the case of vision problems, if you have obstacles, this already increases a lot of the complexity of the agents because it will not be able to see the whole environment. So maybe if you have sensors, this is not so a huge problem because you know what the position of the things are. If you have the audio information, the wall is not anymore a very big problem because you know from the audio source where you can go. You know, I'm not seeing the wall in itself. So the complexity depends a lot on the problem that you're trying to solve, the environment that you are using. So it's hard to say, okay, this thing is it's very problematic. Sometimes we have, but it really depends on the problem you're trying to solve.
So one thing I was curious about, I guess, for both of you, and I think as somebody who's sort of worked adjacent to reinforcement learning, not deep reinforcement learning, but I was curious. So why is it that most reinforcement learning agents in a lot of different contexts, environments, and so on, don't perform as well as as natural organisms or behaving, like even as mice, for example? I mean, I'm thinking of one particular paper where they compared a bunch of different ways of implementing, reinforcement learning models, or actually just variations of different kinds of models with which each have different features. And I think the most successful one kind of combined a few different things from different models, and it was very sort of like, there was certainly not a straightforward solution, and it was really interesting to read about, but it did make me curious about these animals that were able to perform in a way that was much more efficient, much more quickly. I think that was the other thing, the number of training runs, for example, the amount of runs to actually get anywhere near a similar performance. Anyway, so you get where I'm going with this. I'm just sort of speaking to people, especially who have trained deep RL agents that have much more experience. What do you think is, if there is one thing or several things that are really sort of missing currently from how these agents are developed? I mean, what do you think that might be?
Either.
This is again for both of you, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean,
okay, so,
that's really the kind of. Sorry, you go, Paul.
No, go on, please.
That's really kind of the $1 billion question, or however dollar amount you want to put on it. How do we get these agents to get to a level that's like human-like intelligence? And there's lots of examples of, animal or human-like intelligence on specific tasks, but this is why, AI has the G in the middle of it, artificial general intelligence, that people are looking for. And so there's a lot of current directions and limitations that people are working on there. I think some of the interesting things, just for example, that come to my mind are, reinforcement learning agents are quite inefficient with exploring. They learn through trial and error, and so they need to explore the environment to learn what things are out there. And a lot of these deep reinforcement learning agents, the exploration that they do is taking random actions, which is not really what we think of when we think of animal exploration, animal curiosity. There's a lot of excellent work about trying to, go to the edges of the environment, be curious about the environment, ways to find new things in the environment without necessarily penalizing reward, because there's always a trade-off between exploring and exploiting your environment. And so specifically, like, exploration is maybe the first thing that comes to mind, in that we have very animal-unlike exploration in these agents, which is part of the reason why they're so data inefficient, part of the reason why they're so slow, and maybe that they don't find all these other things in the environment. If you make the environment really finely grained in time, it takes a lot of steps to get from one patch to the other. If you have like one of Paulo's mazes, that, there's lots of arcs through these mazes, lots of paths through these mazes. The larger it is, the harder it is to find all these things. And so I think that's one of the really cool future directions, is finding a kind of animal-like way of exploring the environment, because animals and are very, very good at this, at exploring their environment and finding what's relevant and what's not relevant.
I agree with Nathan, and I'd say that exploration is a very huge problem. But I'd like to add another thing is even with exploration, we have it's not an easy task to perceive the environment itself. So for us, for example, if I in an environment and I see a food, and okay, I realize that the food is good for me, I know that the food everywhere. So trying to make a comparison with games. If I see a coin on a screen, the coin can be big, can be small. I know, okay, I create inside my head this high level concept that the coin is a good thing. And then reinforcement learning agent doesn't have this high level concept. It's a bunch of numbers coupled together. So it can pick a coin in one place and the other. For us, it's clear to see it's a coin. No, it doesn't go there. So it's hard to create those kind of high level concepts of things. So again, exploration is hard to manage, and this will be the biggest problem. But even when we have a good exploration, it's not easy, because we can explore, we can find different things on the environment, but we cannot construct a high level perception of the objects that are surrounding us.
Yeah, this kind of.
Okay, go on. No, I just wanted to clarify a little bit that last point. You're talking about, for example, the coin example, and that there's some, for us, like a higher level of kind of abstraction or some kind of conceptualization of the coin. But is that really? I mean, could it also not just be that we have a much more there's just a prior, and in terms of, I'm trying to see how, I mean, I don't know if comparing it to human in this example, is it limited by the fact that the humans just have a lot of prior kind of meaning that we've also learned through, well, I mean, I guess it's not really trial and error in that sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the problem, because again, this prior is huge, and not only for humans, even the mice example of this, they have priors themselves that we cannot put on reinforcement learning agents, and there are very good works trying to add evolutionary algorithms coupled with reinforcement learning algorithms and try to make evolution of those neural networks to follow something that can create a more resembling, more natural behavior. So yeah, you're right, but that's the hard part. It seems not to be easy for no one.
That would be very cool. Maybe some culture in there as well.
I was going to say, this sort of reminds me of the sort of very classical Tolman experiment, where you can get a rat exploring a maze without any rewards, and it can learn, it can express the fact that it actually has learned the whole sort of structure of the maze, despite not being sort of reinforced in perhaps the traditional sense, right? But then that learning becomes apparent with testing. And so this kind of makes me think a little bit about, I mean, I guess what Rory is saying, what you're saying as well, Paulo, that actually, if you already have structures in place that allow you to do that kind of learning without necessarily there being sort of explicit external reinforcement, at least not in the way that I think is often sort of coded in a reinforcement learning agent, for example, then, and this kind of also relates to what I was saying about sort of model-based or model-free, like this idea that perhaps there are already sort of structures that can then be built upon. We can think about them as priors, and that might be one way in which we can sort of, the agents can become much more efficient, much better at performing, and sort of start getting towards a sort of human level, I don't know, something better level learning. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. If not, that's fine. There's also a question from Alex that I can ask as well right now, if that works. Yeah. So Alex Kachelnik, who is I think our biggest fan. Thank you so much, Alex, for joining, I think, for every episode. And that reminds me, Nathan, we were going to say as well that we were very impressed with your callbacks to the previous episodes. We very much appreciated that.
I was going to say as well, Alec, I mean, he may be our biggest fan, but we're also his biggest fan.
Oh, yes, that's very true. Yeah, we also, it goes both ways. But so Alex has a question. He says to both speakers, clever AIs beat human chess players, but do not use the same algorithms as people. How do you see the interaction between the design of artificial agents and experimental data from organisms? Would you modify the artificial algorithms so that they make mistakes that organisms do in experimental situations? Or in other words, is your priority to understand living foragers or to create very smart AIs?
Very good question. And it's hard to say. I would say that every research has a different goal that you want to achieve. So in this case of games, there is also an appeal of finishing, being the first to beat the humans in a specific game. So the research was very oriented to beating the Kasparov chess match or beating Lee Sedol in a Go match. But this doesn't represent the research that we have. I'd say that we are trying plenty of options. We are trying to, in the end, everyone is trying to achieve the artificial general intelligence. We know that is basically it's not realistic goal, but in a sense, we are trying to be closer and closer and closer. And it's not easy to say that there is one priority over another, but it's more like a personal taste. So if you want, okay, no problem, you can try to solve a specific game. This is not what we are currently doing. The examples I gave was like points specifically in time that we have these very good moments to show, okay, this technology can do very impressive things, not necessarily in a natural way, but we are trying to follow more or less this a direction that we have both sides. We don't have one single side.
Yeah, I would say personally, my research is aimed at doing both, really finding better algorithms or better ways of training agents to make them better, from a engineering or business perspective, but also for using these models to gain insights into biological function, right? That's kind of my background in psychology and understanding the mechanisms behind behavior. There's, in terms of the algorithms, there's lots of different reinforcement learning algorithms that have varying amounts of improvement on a bunch of different tasks. And there's not really a metric about how biological like these are, although we can make some kind of one-off analogies to different algorithms. There is some really interesting work coming out that's been coming out recently also on discovering cognitive models of biological agents using deep reinforcement learning networks. So some things that I'm thinking about are like meta reinforcement learning from work, where you can train a reinforcement learning network and give it reinforcement learning inputs. So it learns to reinforcement learn. It learns its own reinforcement learning algorithm. And you can imagine maybe if it's trained on similar environmental statistics from biological agents, maybe it'll learn a reinforcement learning algorithm that's similar to a reinforcement learning algorithm that's good for that task. You can see how the parallels maybe biological agents might have found that similar algorithm through interactions with the environment. There's also some really nice work from Kevin Miller and colleagues at DeepMind that just came out using supervised learning to train networks on behavior from animals. And you'll train a recurrent neural network with a bunch of constraints on it in order to do cognitive model discovery. So to try to find a parsimonious explanation for this behavior in a recurrent neural network in a way that's human interpretable, which I'm really excited to check out when the code comes out. So that kind of work is trying to find the algorithms that drive behavior in biological agents through different ways, different lenses. And I think these are really great tools in order to kind of get at the question that biological researchers have been getting at all on: what are the mechanisms that drive behavior? And so they're not going to be the solution, but they're another tool in the toolbox, really.
I'm not sure if any of our other co-hosts have any questions. I mean, I think the theme of uniting people working on deep reinforcement learning or other computational approaches with biologists, right? With a lot of the kind of work that I guess we've been highlighting through the, in a lot of our other episodes. I mean, I think that's something that, this is more a comment rather than a question, I guess, but it's interesting to think about how in the future, different labs can work together to provide those two different aspects. Okay.
This is one thing that I have hard time to find research that combines both at the same time with people from both sides. It's not very common. So it's the very few cases that we have people from biology or neuroscience working with computer scientists. And as I told you, we have plenty of tools to do, but you need an understanding of computer science. So we are developing the algorithm side, but it would be very, very, very nice if we had some sort of collaboration with the neuroscientists, biologists, and trying to study together. And unfortunately, it's still rare to see those kind of work.
I think Alex sort of agrees perhaps as well. He says, thanks. My fear is that some young scientists could be distracted from studying the behavior of real organisms. And I think that's interesting. Yes, it's a fair point. After all, I guess that behavior has inspired a lot of the reinforcement learning approaches that we have in the first place, right? So, well, if there aren't, I can't. Anybody else?
Oh yeah, go on, Dennis. You go first if you got one.
Hey, okay, so I have one question to you both, basically, in terms of the representations within the networks that you have trained, whether there are any traces of let's say representations of travel time or other decision variables.
So I have not gotten the chance to look at, in the particular paper I was talking about, haven't gotten the chance to look at representations of particular biological variables that we might think would be important. But the data is there. And like I said, it's kind of a good problem to have, that you have access to too many internal variables, that you need to find a way to do discovery. It's kind of maybe the opposite problem a lot of people in neuroscience have, where you would like to have more neuronal recordings, but a lot of limitations are there. But no, I haven't tried that. That's an interesting point. And it's always nice to kind of see what the representations the network learns through experience are, and how that might relate to biological systems in some way. It's a great next step.
That's an interesting question. And I remember that when I was working with genetic algorithms, one thing that we always did and we didn't like to do was to what we called engineering of the reward function. So we create a very general reward function that, okay, we want the agent to pick a food, but the agent doesn't learn. So then we put, okay, but we want the agent to pick a food and the position of the food is there, and the agent would go in a straight line. Oh no, but okay, this is not the intended behavior, because so then okay, we will have to add some constraints in the reward function so that the agent behaves like we expected. And this is not what we want, but the opposite. We want to see that the emergence of these kind of behavior. And it's very hard to see this. So when we create an objective, and especially using reinforcement learning, you say, okay, this reward was good, it was keeping doing. So in a sense, you are optimizing a behavior that may or may not have some kind of emergence of natural behavior. And when you have, it's hard to evaluate. We don't have metrics to evaluate this. So it's more like a subjective thing, just to see the agent. So it's a very good question, but it's again hard to see.
I have one kind of final, somewhat specific actually. Should have done it the other way around, but a question actually for Paulo about, talking quite a bit about like history of how there have been these different kind of holy grail challenges in terms of games, particularly that like we've been testing the agents on. And I was just wondering, like, is there a particular next holy grail in terms of something that people want to beat? We recently read a paper with these kind of agents, AI agents, beating players at is it Diplomacy, the game? I think it was quite interesting, like where they also incorporate like dialogue in, so human-like dialogue, and yeah, that was super interesting to note, to see that the AI model managed to win tournaments and stuff, like kind of tricking, like verbally tricking humans into whatever strategic stuff. So I don't know if there's anything in the future again that you're excited to see if AI can crack.
Okay. Historically, we had chess. Chess was the most important one. Right? So when Deep Blue won the match against Kasparov, was like, okay, that's it. We have computer intelligence that is better than the humans, which of course is not true. But it was like the thought at the time, and Go was something that was very important, but specific to the researchers. And one thing that after DeepMind had been able to be better than humans in Go, then it kind of lost the importance of having some holy grail or something. So now we see different research, we see different games, and we have still plenty of possibilities. For example, you say Diplomacy, you have any board game, you can say. I don't know, maybe I would say that the next step would be go to play any game, that's it. Or any game of a specific context. For example, it's not, there are very different games where we have models currently, for example, ChatGPT can handle very easy language tasks. So we can say there is more recent research trying to use this large language model to play games. So maybe they are able to learn to play different games using a single algorithm. So I would say that would be the more in what we are expecting now as the holy grail, is to be able to beat several games.
Right, so something as generalizable as possible, really. Yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes.
That's a perfect way to end, I think. Thinking about the future. So thank you again so much, Nathan and Paulo, for speaking. It's been a real pleasure to have you. And of course, thanks to my co-host as well for joining, and for everyone who is or has been online. So this is it for this season of the Future of Foraging. Watch this space. I don't know. We have no guarantees, but anyway, but we hope you've all enjoyed all the episodes and everything, and it's also on YouTube as well. So for anybody who, if you guys want to send whatever, it's going to be uploaded to YouTube in a bit. So and yeah, thank you very much, everyone. I will end the broadcast now and see you sometime in our lives.